They told me for years there was no money in podcasting. Well, they were all wrong. Okay, so starting the business itself, what was it like for you? Because here in New Jersey, it wasn't necessarily difficult. It was just kind of knowing what forms to fill out and who to ask to fill them out for you and how much you pay. But when it comes to like taxes and so many different things, you know, a single member to a multi-member LLC or et cetera, et cetera. So talk me through the process of forming the business, you know, getting the LLC, the EIN, all that stuff, and some tips out there for someone out there who wants to start their own business in your area.
So first and foremost is research. You really need to get your research done. What I personally did was I logged on to my local state. So I live in Connecticut. My business is out of Connecticut, even though I do business throughout the country. What I did was I logged on to my state Department of Labor and took it from there. I made a couple phone calls to find out what I needed to do. And I also joined a lot of networking groups in my local area where there's a ton of entrepreneurs. And I said to them, hey, what do I need to do? What are some things I need to know? And they pointed me in the right direction. On top of that, you know, going into those groups, it was also finding the right bookkeepers, finding the right people that will help guide me with my taxes and making sure everything is set. So at the end of the year, I have a CPA that I can just say, here you go. And they take care of everything for me. So it's a lot of just putting yourself out there and talking. And it's a lot of research and legwork that you need to do. I also help businesses with that at this point. So if somebody's looking to do something like that, I can certainly help guide them into the right places so that way they can find those things or do it for them and present them with everything that they need.
What do you think of the networking groups? Because I've flirted with a few of them down here in Jersey. Well, I know everywhere they have chambers of commerce, but I'm flirting with the idea of going back to a chamber of commerce because right before COVID, you know, this business started before COVID, a little before COVID, and literally in February and January of 2020, we had a partnership with the Great Elizabeth Chamber of Commerce where we were going to produce their podcast for them in person, and then COVID happened and everything's been on hold. But you know, Elizabeth Chamber, call me. But networking groups, how is the success for you? What's your experience with them? Because personally, I find them to be very helpful for most aspects. Some of them can be a little hit or miss, but every single one of those groups should definitely have a podcast. We're going to follow up on that a little bit. But from your experience, what have these networking groups been like for you?
Well, I've done a couple different networking groups. So I've joined official ones such as BNI, and I've done a couple of one-offs. I've been invited to a couple of different kinds. I have a couple of people that I talk to that run their own every couple of weeks or months. And I find that it's very useful because you meet people that you typically wouldn't meet. So for example, well, you and I met in a networking group.
We did.
We would have never connected had neither of us attended that networking group. So I find that they're very, very critical. I tend to do all my stuff virtually because of where I'm located. It's kind of a remote area. And I have kids, as we went over. So being able to be home for them when they need me to is critical. So a lot of my networking is by the internet, which is great because it saves time because I can attend back-to-back networking groups all day long, whereas opposed to if I have to drive to one, I might be only able to do one or two. So I find them very, very useful. And I always tell people the best way to get business is by networking, especially if you have a service-based business.
Definitely. No, 1,000%. 1,000%, which is why I like different chambers of commerce or groups like BNI. I'm a little more old school. I like being there in person. I like going to the actual networking event, shaking hands. Zoom has its purposes. Like right now, this podcast is technically being recorded through Zoom. You know, the Zoom feed is going into my graphics package on a separate program, but it couldn't be done without Zoom because, you know, I'm in a pretty heavy populated area, but my studio is in Montclair, which is a suburb, which gives me the option of doing remote podcasting. And as I said earlier, a networking group, the fact that I see someone they don't have a podcast or access to a podcast, is like, well, you're missing out because like that group, that meeting we were in, that BNI meeting.
Yeah.
I like what they're doing over there, but I was like, this whole meeting is a podcast. Like this whole meeting could be a podcast. You take the audio, you cut it up, you edit it around a little bit, get rid of the soft spots, and you could have it be. So if someone missed the meeting, here's the podcast. You can have it on a private feed just for the people in the group. Or if someone wants to be interested in joining the group, you send them an audio file. Here's an episode of the podcast. Here's what a meeting's like.